Hi there and welcome to another one of my videos. I hope you're all doing amazingly, and today I wanted to talk to you guys about another book that I read, namely the book 1984 by George Orwell. Now, the spoilers are going to be starting right out the gate, so if you're interested in reading the book, you should probably stop watching this video and read the book first. Now, this is a pretty famous book, and I think it deserves all the fame that it has. Personally, I would like to call it a masterpiece because for me it was really interesting to read, it got me to think a lot, and overall I really enjoyed it. Just so you get an idea of the book already, imagine living in a world where everything you say, everything you do, even everything you think is either controlled or monitored by an omnipresent government. That is basically what you go through while reading this book. And I found it was really interesting, and you got a lot of insights into how a totalitarian regime operates, and it also gave you almost a guidebook what to look out for. The book presents a world where truth and fact is basically manipulated, and history itself is rewritten in order to fit the narratives of those in power. We like to think that even with all the uncertainty that there is in the world, there are still some points of refuge called truth and fact from which we can attempt to slowly advance, and we can tackle the rest that isn't really that certain. But in this book, there is a government that, in an attempt to exert total control, even takes away the idea of truth and fact, so that any independent thinker is basically unable to develop a thought of their own that could possibly go against the narrative of this authoritarian government. And while reading this book, I think it also becomes obvious to you that keeping people in a state of constant confusion is like an amazing way in order to keep them also incapable from properly thinking by themselves, and also to control their actions through this. The people start to become puppets. If you have no idea what is actually true anymore, it's almost impossible to decide what to act on. And it becomes literally impossible to even know what to think, which is an incredibly scary scenario. Not even your own mind, which is supposed to be your most private and personal part, is yours anymore. And you can basically say goodbye to any autonomy or self-advocacy in your own life. As I think you can already tell, control is one of the central themes of this book, and it is exerted in many ways, and not just through the alterations of history and through the manipulation of facts, as I just told you, but also through the use of language and through the use of surveillance in order to control the people. Now, out of these next two, surveillance and language, I want to first start tackling the subject of how they use language in order to exert control. The party basically creates a new language called Newspeak with the purpose of eliminating any possibility of subversive thoughts. So, for example, words that could be used in a rebellion, for example, they are simply eliminated, and by eliminating those words, also most of the feelings and most of the thoughts associated with those words also cease to exist. After all, if you cannot really say it, it also becomes way harder to think it. And there are many ways languages can be used, and it's not just governments. Language can also be used just by regular people in order to create a false or just a misleading portrayal of reality. By saying things a certain way, you can easily control a narrative without even having to put in too much effort. You just change in one word for another word, and you have your desired effect. You just say collateral damage instead of saying dead civilians, and you just say advanced interrogation techniques instead of saying torture. By choosing the words carefully, we can easily change people's idea and perception of the world around them. And after all, an individual's, or at least on an individual level, someone's perception of the world is the reality of the world. The perception is the only way we can perceive the world around us anyway. Another big aspect of this book is the concept of surveillance that I mentioned earlier, and this is maybe also the most iconic feature of the book, hence why all the book covers that you see of this book have some form of variation of an eyeball on them, because it represents the constant surveillance that they suffer. The people are under constant surveillance through telescreens or even by something called the thought police, something that I find absolutely terrifying. What I thought was really interesting about this aspect of the whole surveillance thing is that the characters in the book don't actually know if there actually is someone on the other side of the surveillance actually looking at them. But just the fear of the possibility of being watched is enough in order to keep people in line. You don't actually need to monitor every individual constantly. The people just need to know that they could be watched at any moment, and every now and again you just need to catch some poor soul doing something they're not supposed to and make an example out of them. And the outcome or the effect of possibly being surveilled at any moment is virtually the same as being surveilled individually constantly at every second of every day. Fear in this scenario is basically doing half of the work of the totalitarian government for them. Fear is, in the end, when you read this book, it becomes obvious that fear is the best friend of a totalitarian government. It's their ultimate companion in order to control the people. The party, which is the government, controls the people's complete reality. But this is also only possible if the people constantly accept the lies and continue these lies themselves in order to kind of keep the theater or the show of the narrative going for the government. It is hard to explain, but you get this weird feeling that everything is just fake, and people do their best to kind of keep this show or this theater going, and they play their part in order to satisfy this big scary government. The book also presents the idea of doublethink. Doublethink, this is basically the ability to believe two contradictory things at the same time and also accept both of them as being true. It is a form of cognitive dissonance that the party uses in order to suppress dissent and in order to ensure like the absolute loyalty of their people. And I gotta say, like, if you're a totalitarian government and you ever manage to impose this doublethink on the people, that means that you've made it. That means you've like reached the pinnacle of totalitarian regime. When people literally accept two contradictory beliefs as true, that means that they are truly following you blindly and that they do not even permit themselves the slightest amount of critical thinking anymore. And in the end, that is like the absolute dream of a totalitarian government. The book also brings up the idea of a thought crime, which is just having the wrong thought is already illegal and can have consequences. And it also shows you how invasive and how much influence and how much control this government demands. And ultimately, that's how much control a dictatorship might strive for. Now, the only other time where I can think of that the concept of thought crime even appears is in religion, where an all-seeing God that not only controls everything but kind of monitors everything and even keeps an eye on your most private and most intimate thoughts and will judge you for it. But entering into this is maybe too much now, and let's just stay on the topic of authoritarian governments and not authoritarian gods. I also wanted to mention the ministries that the totalitarian government has created. These are ministries whose job it is essentially to control the people, and I have to admit that I really enjoyed the names of the ministries because of the amazing twist of irony. For example, the Ministry of Love is the ministry responsible for torturing, and the Ministry of Truth is, for example, the one that dedicates itself to altering records so that the party or the government's version of the narrative always matches their current records. history itself basically becomes a tool to control the people, and it always tries to ensure that the government seems infallible. If the party suddenly were to say that they think the earth has the shape of a donut, then all the records and all the science would be altered in order to match this story. The truth ends up being whatever the party says it is. In our own world, we can sadly also see some similar attempts at manipulation in the form of fake news and alterations of history, and also just the general spread of misinformation. What makes it even trickier in the real world is that it almost seems as if everyone is doing it. At least in the book, it is clear as day who is responsible for all this manipulation, but in reality, it's almost as if every now and again, every side tries to indulge in this practice whenever it's convenient for them. And sadly, people almost choose to look the other way when it's their own side that does it. They look the other way because they don't want to go against their own tribe, and because there is this constant idea of us versus them in our modern day politics. Another thing that I thought was so interesting about this book is the fact that it was written in a time with way less technology, and yet in a way it has managed to almost perfectly characterize, or not characterize, but it has managed to predict how technology is going to incorporate these age-old concepts of authoritarian governance. And technology has made it easier than ever in order to control the population. And this alteration of the news and the reality that we see in the book also happens in a way every day, just not that it is done in the hands of a totalitarian government, but instead it is done by the hands of the social media agencies, through advertising and through whatever pops up on your phone. Because we spend so much time on our phone, what ends up popping up in our feed essentially will make up a big part of how we perceive our current culture, how we perceive the current economy, and how we perceive the world, even though that might not at all be an accurate representation. What we end up seeing on our phones is just the result of an algorithm that is trying to ensure the maximum engagement and the maximum addiction in order to satisfy advertisers so that they get the most back out of their investment. I think we really need to be aware of the power behind altering people's perception of reality depending on whatever the algorithms show them. Now, being at the mercy of social media companies that end up doing the bidding of advertisers is probably not the best, but at least this power isn't in the hands of a technology proficient, authoritarian, totalitarian government, the same way as it is in the book. But then again, who knows what the future has in store for us? Orwell's warning about manipulation of truth, propaganda, and surveillance resonates quite a lot in our modern era and in our modern day today, and that's both eye-opening and also very scary. And with the advancements of technology and also the rise of authoritarian governments kind of around the globe, this book 1984 serves as a great reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and what it could lead to. Now, if you haven't read this masterpiece yet, I highly recommend doing so. Even though I have spoiled the concepts and some of the general ideas of the book, there's still a lot more that happens throughout the story. So definitely, I think you should check it out. And I also want to say thank you so much for your attention and for making it to the end of the video now. This was all I had to say for today. You could always hit the subscribe button or give a thumbs up to this video. You can also not do it, it's completely up to you. And yes, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.